Good morning, everyone. Senator Prentice. We are between the clock on the wall and the real time. So would you rise with me, please? And I have Senator Lang pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'm glad to see all of you here. We didn't have the snow that we were all anticipating. We were debating last night whether or not we should cancel the meeting. But here we are. So we are this morning introducing Senate Bill 596. And the prime sponsor is Senator Ricciardi.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable members of the Education Committee. Today I have the honor and privilege of introducing Senate Bill 596. This bill is a pivotal piece of legislation which seeks to address a very significant gap in New Hampshire's current child care scholarship system. Early child care stakeholders came to me this past fall asking for help to address the issue of differential payment access for children at risk of developmental disability. While our existing child care framework provides necessary support for children with diagnosed disabilities, it unfortunately leaves behind those at the cusp of developmental challenges, those not yet diagnosed but showing very clear signs of being at risk. These are children who show clear delays in motor function, speech, cognitive play, and social emotional development. Children who often later receive formal diagnoses for autism, attention deficit disorder, and other learning impairments. The evidence is clear that the earlier we identify, intervene, and support children who are at risk for developmental delay, the greater the likelihood the child is later able to catch up academically to their peers. To address this issue, my bill, Senate Bill 596, proposes an expansion of the definition of disability within our child care scholarship program. By broadening this definition to include children who show signs of or are at risk for delayed social or emotional development, we open the door for additional classroom support for providers and access to other early intervention services, which is a cornerstone of positive long-term outcomes in child development. To ensure the effectiveness and accuracy of this initiative, the bill outlines a very clear process for screening these at-risk children using established, standardized early childhood tools. These include, but are not limited to, the Ages and Stages questionnaires and the Denver 2 developmental screening test tools with a proven track record in identifying potential developmental delays. Furthermore, this policy change is not only about supporting our children, but also about bolstering our child care providers. By enabling access to differential payments for at-risk children, we can provide centers with the necessary resources to maintain appropriate ratios and offer high-quality care, thereby expanding access to child care for all families across our state. I've heard time and time again of providers suppressing ratios in classrooms because they have a few children who fit into this category, requiring additional support. With access to differential payment, centers will be able to bring in some additional staff capacity to assist in providing these children with the hands-on learning support that they need to be successful. To address any concerns regarding the fiscal implications of this bill, I want to highlight that the anticipated cost is manageable and will be covered through the Federal Child Care Development Block Grant with no need for state general funds. Differential payment as it currently exists is grossly underutilized by providers, in part because so few children can demonstrate a diagnosable disability when they are under the age of 3 or 4. This bill changes that, opening an important revenue stream to our providers who are serving our most in need children. In conclusion, this bill represents a strategic, evidence-informed approach to enhancing our child care system. It ensures that our children, particularly those at risk of developmental delays, receive the support they need during their most formative years. I urge my fellow committee members to support this vital legislation for the well-being of our children and the future of our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. I have just a quick question. How, you said that it's going to be federally funded. Do you have any idea what the cost is going to be?
We don't have that figure quite yet, and I know there are others that can speak to the potential answer to that question.
Okay, so the LOB, well, not the LOB, what is it? The Budget Committee. Can never remember all of these numbers. They will have the price tag for us.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very
Thank
much. Michelle Merritt. Welcome to turn on the mic.
Is it
There
on
you go.
now? There we go. Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee. My name is Michelle Merritt. I'm the president at New Futures. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our organization, but by means of refresher, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to improve the health and well-being of all Granite Staters. We are also the state's designated Kids Count organization, and with that, we bring data-informed policies to support Granite State families. So for the past 2 years, New Futures has worked with a diverse coalition of stakeholders around early childhood issues and child care issues in the state of New Hampshire. We were working to craft effective policy change to support child care providers and families. And this past summer, when that group was meeting, they identified a couple of policies that they thought were primed for this upcoming session. And this particular piece of legislation was identified as one of their 2 top priorities. So presently, differential payments, just by means, again, of level setting, is only available to children who have a diagnosable disability. That means that a provider has actually signed off, or they have a special education plan or identified that way. It is not currently available for children who are at risk. The amount that providers receive for children who are eligible for differential payment is $100 a week. So providers in the state of New Hampshire who are working to improve quality and best meet the needs of the kids in their programs regularly perform developmental screening and behavioral screenings on the infants and toddlers within their programs. Obviously, early identification in young children for potential developmental delay or social emotional delay is critical, as well as early intervention. With increasing frequency, New Hampshire's child care providers are identifying children who are at significant risk, who have high need and require additional support in the classroom, but who otherwise do not qualify for differential payment under the current definition of disability. So this excludes them from receiving differential payment, despite these children having high needs in the classroom. What this ends up meaning is a couple of different things. From the parent experience, and we've heard this multiple times, I actually just heard this about 2 weeks ago when I was presenting to the Leadership New Hampshire class, is that parents who have kids who have not yet received a formal diagnosis for ADHD or autism or another learning impairment often cycle through child care facilities. They're not equipped to be able to handle the needs of the children. And the child care providers themselves are in an impossible situation. The choices are: you charge that family more when they can barely pay it as it is. You can exclude the child from the program because you don't have the capacity, or you can suppress your enrollment numbers, which is what Senator Ricciardi was just mentioning. It's not good for the families. provides or it creates a situation in which there's incredible instability. And then also for the child care providers who do not want to be in the situation of not being able to help and support kids who are the most at risk. This particular bill seeks to address that gap. We do believe that if this change were to go forward, that it would make a significant difference for many kids and many families in this state. We have had multiple conversations with stakeholders again, and this is one of the most frequently identified issues. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I can also talk about the fiscal note question to the extent that you'd like me to address that at all. But we would urge the committee to support this piece of legislation. We believe it's common sense. The funds are there and they're grossly underutilized at this particular point in time.
Questions? Senator Gendro?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So with the grant monies, is it sustainable?
So currently, the Child Care Development Fund that the state receives that supports the Child Care Scholarship Program, differential payment is a permitted use of those funds. We were estimating in our own just back of the envelope math that it would, if every single child who were eligible within scholarship picked up and the provider actually, did the paperwork and everything that they needed to do to receive differential payment, that the cost would be between $1.5 and $2.5 million annually.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that would be entirely federal funds through the existing fund. Again, that's just vastly underutilized.
Any questions? Seeing none. So how many children presently are using the fund? And how many are diagnosed and actually eligible for
I can get you those numbers from the department. We were anticipating that if I think it was 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 children would be identified, that the total number of kids that would end up being eligible within the program was, I'm sorry, I don't have the right memo in front of me. I can get you that number. I do have it.
I'm just wondering how many are using it right now and how many more do you
Okay, so
anticipate?
there are almost 3,000 children who are using state scholarship. The number who are using differential payment, I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay,
It's not a lot.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Um,
Oh, and I'm sorry, I have one more thing just to note.
Okay.
We had several folks who wanted to be here today, but the unpredictability with the weather prevented some folks from being able to coordinate childcare and other things in order to be here. So I did just want to mention, and we can have them submit through the online portal, register their support, but there was a coalition who was working behind this of
Okay.
about,
Well, we have a lot
25
of people online that are
organizations.
supporting it.
Okay.
So, a lot of them, so.
thank you.
Okay. Jesse Davis or Brian Clark, did you want to talk at all? Welcome.
Thank you. Brian Clark, General Counsel for the Division of Economic Stability, and I have with me
Jesse Davis, the Bureau Chief of Child Development and Head Start Collaboration. So we are just here to clarify that state funds are actually paying for the protected class at this time under the under our department. And so this would have a fiscal impact. We do need to go back and talk with the advocates and the senator about some technical and fiscal impacts of this bill.
So what you're saying, the state funds right now are supporting the thing.
Yes,
So
yes.
how much does the federal government contribute?
To the protected class, to this specific class, zero
Okay.
appropriations.
Senator Lang?
So, so are you saying that we would use less state funds if this was to pass, because we'd be able to shift the spending from there over to the CCDP funds?
So it gets a little more complex than that because we have multiple definitions under the protected class, and under the CCDBG block grant, you have to have 12-month eligibility for each person or family that is under this protected class. And so state funds are appropriated for these children because it could be somebody who is at risk for foster care or a number of different categories. So that would have to apply to these children as well. So it's just a little bit more complex than just saying that CCDBG dollars would be appropriated only for the differential. So we just need to go back and talk with the senator and the advocates about how this could be written in a way that could support these families.
When could you have that information?
So this was a late file bill, so we're still working on the fiscal analysis, but we hope to have it done by the end of this week or early next week.
Okay, fair enough. Because it'd be nice to know what we're talking about. Any other things? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to speak to this bill? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on SB 596. Thank you for coming. Okay. We'll take a 5-minute break. Sure. 5 minute recess? Sure. Okay. And then we can delve into whatever else we have to delve into.
session.
Second,
All those in favor?
Aye.
do you want to just change?
We are in executive session. The first bill we're taking up is SB 342.
Madam Chair, I move OTP on Senate Bill 342.
I'll second.
We have an OTP and second on 342.
Madam Chair, I'd move amendment number 24-0239S, and I'll speak to my motion afterwards.
You speak to your motion.
Second,
So, Madam Chair, this amendment is after work with Department of Education. If you remember this bill, we have an,
I'm sorry, do we have a copy of this amendment?
yep, it was
You were
given out.
this morning.
It's, should be, I
At
gave it out
5:22.
last week when we met, so everybody had it in advance.
it's an extra one. Oh,
Peter gave it
okay.
to me.
So if you remember, this bill is an attempt to modernize and to create a better building plan for school districts that's predictable and sustainable. Under the current law, we allocate up to $50 million for building aid, and then school districts apply for the building aid after spending money, getting plans made, not knowing whether or not they're going to get any money, and then a committee at the state level decides which projects will move forward, and then everybody else is rejected. In this last cycle, we had 22 applicants, only 3 got funding, which meant there were 19 schools that wasted money on projecting plans that never got any building aid, but they spent education dollars to present a plan. What this bill does is create what is essentially a sinking fund for each district. Allows a predictable amount of money to go into based on their student count into a state sinking fund that's held by the state in escrow. And then when the district wants to expend those funds, they can check and see how much money each year is in it. And when the district wants to expend those funds, they would send a request to the state. The Department of Education would approve the building plan, that it meets the criteria for usage of those funds. It would then go back to the district as an approval, and they would just need to get the approval of the voters, just like any other bond. And they would get the approval of the voters to spend the money from the state sinking fund. Again, what this does is every year we slowly wind down the existing program. We can't shut that off, can't shut the spigot off immediately, because we still have some critical schools that need to be addressed with and districts need access to those funds. But over time, over the next 10 years, this bill would replace that fund entirety, putting $80 million total every biennium into the building fund instead of $50 million, and allow for districts to be able to plan and look out and say, oh, in 5 years, we're going to have this much money. We can plan in a capital improvements committee to expend those funds in 5 years. But it gives them a chance to know exactly what they have to spend. So I think it's a much more modernized, much more sustainable and predictable model. So I'd ask us to adopt the amendment and pass the bill.
Okay, any discussion?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote no on this. Just reviewing the notes. There were 17 applications for building aid. 3 of them were funded in 2023. That leaves about 14 that were not funded, and now we are adding in charter schools to this, with over roughly 30 charter schools or so into the mix. So a lot of long overdue projects may not get funded. And it also looks like, according to this, 5 million, I think is what you had, will be transferred from the Education Trust Fund for school building aid. And that fund is already being massively depleted by the EFA program. So I can't vote for this.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to answer some of those concerns. So understand, we already allocate $50 million of that to the building aid, that's done. This would slowly unwind by $5 million each year, that old building aid program. So it's not taking away any money. We're not spending any additional money. It's existing money that we've already spent, but we're going to migrate it to the new sinking fund program. So it's not taking away. And again, under the current building plan, which still exists and isn't changed, the current building program that $50 million has still stays in effect for the next 10 years. It's just slowly wind down by $5 million a year, so we can address existing schools that have critical needs and still have state funding for it until they build up their bank account. and and after 10 years, they'd have the money. So just understand that this doesn't do away with the $50 million that's in that and still available to those programs. The new sinking fund will be available to charter schools, but not the not the original $50 million. So it doesn't change the existing building structure. It only moves forward with funding an additional funding stream or funding source that is more predictable and sustainable for all schools. Charter schools currently have access to some funding for lease programs and other things. This is meant to supplant that ultimately and give them a more traditional way of dealing with building funding, just like, again, charter schools are public schools and they're entitled to funding. So I just want to be clear to say that we're not immediately repealing the $50 million existing program. That program is still there for the next 10 years. It'll still be there. It is made and would allow for any critical school infrastructure you have now that may need those other schools that got denied would still be able to apply next year for that money in a block grant. But at the same time that they have that happening, we're also starting to build their savings account for predictability in the future.
You want to have a rebuttal?
No.
Okay. I have a question. You say public charter schools, but the charter school has to be owned by the charter school in order to be eligible for the building, right?
DOE fixed all that for me. So yes, you're right. It has to be about, they have to own the building and the
Right.
maintenance, that kind of thing. So
Okay. So we have an amendment. 0239. Do I have a vote what to do with the amendment?
aye.
Aye.
No. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's 3, and you say no, just that's 3-1. Now we have the underlying bill. All those in favor of the underlying bill with the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
That's 3-2 on that one. 3-1. 3-1. Right.
And I'll take that out, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Yes, she is.
Okay, the next one is 522.
Madam Chair, I move OTP on Senate Bill 522.
We have an OTP of 522
Second?
and a second.
Madam Chair, I move amendment number 24-0623S.
Second?
Discussion?
Early childhood education. If I could speak to my
Yes.
so from the amendment I gave out last week, this has been a collaborative effort between Department of Education as well as the Department of Health and Human Services. In the most current amendment, there were some things in Section 2 that DHHS said, we don't need that. It's already law. It's duplicative, so please remove it. And so I did that. That was in number R, had some additional numbers to it, and we took those out. I think it was originally was number 2 and 4 we took out, or 2 and 3, and we moved 4 up. I don't remember. The other thing that I changed at the request of the agencies was on page 3, on line 29. It said that the Commissioner of the Department of Education it now says in collaboration with the Commissioner of Department of Health and Human Services. I had in coordination, and they asked me to make the single word change for some reason, they felt collaboration was a better word choice than cooperation. So in cooperation with, I agreed. It was not, again, for me, it was fine. What this bill does is establish an early childhood education account for children who meet a 350% poverty threshold. It allows parents to get money, and some of the language in here, and the reason why we're working with 2 agencies is we were talking earlier about the CCDP block grant. Those funds are eligible for these services, and we'd be allowed to leverage more federal dollars to support low-income families to obtain pre-K services. One of the conversations was around whether or not it was only should be for full-time programs or should we allow part-time programs or differential programs? So there may be parents who only are eligible for the early child education accounts, don't want to send their kid to a full-time pre-K program, but do want to offer like a math class for their kid or an English class for their kid. And so these early child education accounts would allow them to utilize funding if they make it for things like a math program or a reading program or a science program that's age appropriate. The other thing this bill does is it phases this in. So we deal with 4 and 5-year-olds in the first year. We wait 2 years and then we drop it down to include 3-year-olds to give time for the program to ramp up and get established. The goal of the program is that due to the increased nature of making these funds available to low-income families, it allows what I call stackable funds. They may get a child care scholarship money from the federal government due to their low-income status. They would be able to stack these education dollars on top of that to increase the amount of money that's available to be able to go to pre-K programs across the state, which means that now early childhood programs can add pre-K programs and increase their funding for the students they already have. They'd be able to increase the amount of revenue they get, which means that they could raise teacher salaries, they could hire more teachers and make more availability. So again, I think across the board, this has a whole lot of positives for New Hampshire and our low-income pre-K students from 3 to 5-year-olds. So I'd ask us to adopt the amendment and then pass the bill.
Discussion? Senator Prentice.
Thank you so much. And Senator Lang, I'm sorry, I was introducing a bill, so I came in at the tail end. And even though you've been talking about this since I've been sitting here, I've been situating myself, which we always know is a situation in itself. So where are we with stakeholders on this? And where has Senator Whitley seen this latest version?
Yes. So to answer your question, I worked as of this morning. That's why we had another amendment. Yesterday,
Okay.
DHHS and DOE weighed back
Has
in
she-
with a couple minor changes. And they both, and I got the amendment late yesterday and I sent that out to them and both agencies have responded. They're completely okay with the bill. There's no more changes they're requesting. They're okay with it. Senator Whitley and I had a little back and forth and we came to a disagreement because there were some things it was my bill and I just wouldn't let him in the bill. I wouldn't let it in the bill. And so from the amendment that we worked on collaboratively when it was sent to me, I looked at it and said, I can't agree to this piece. And to be honest with you, 98% of what Senator Whitley asked for is in this bill. It was just some things under reporting and rulemaking where I'm a firm believer we only have one boss. And so in the bill that they had, in her language, she wanted DHHS and DOE to be peers. DHHS and DOE to be peers. And I don't think that works when you have a program. You need to have one person who's responsible for it. And so where you see some of the things like they work collaboratively, but DOE has the final say because only one person could be in charge of the program. And so we had some disagreement around that language. And there was, thank you, sorry, Peter. There was no, we couldn't come to an agreement on that. But 98% of the amendment Senator Whitley had, when I did a side-by-side comparison with this, 98% of what she asked for is in this bill.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just seeing this amendment today, I think it's a very important bill. And I think we should have some time to review it with these stakeholders. I think Senator Lang for, defining what this does. However, this is a large amendment. It's a very important bill. I'd like a little more time on it if possible.
Madam Chair, the other thing I say is the only thing that changed from last week to this, I gave out this amendment last week. We've had it for a week. I made 2 minor changes. One was the word cooperation to collaboration, and one was removing 2 sections of the law that DHHS said, we already have this in law. We don't need this. Please remove it. That's the only change from last week's amendment. So you've had the amendment for over a week.
It is such an important bill. I think, and if your changes are, like you said, small, but for a substantial bill, I think it'd be advantageous of us to talk with the stakeholders and reach out to Senator Whitley as well and just make sure everything's copacetic.
Senator Prentice.
So, Senator Lang, we saw a version last week. So this is the same version as last week or different?
It's a minor, has
That's
2
the
minor changes that the
collaboration
department-
and cooperation that you just said, correct? But still, okay.
So it's the same exact bill from same exact amendment from last week, the minor two exceptions of, again, if you look at, let me see if I have the old amendment here. So 475S, basically I removed section, number 2. They asked set reimbursement rates across all programs to match 75th percentile market survey. That's already all law. And so they said, we don't need that. Please don't put that in. So I struck section 2 from last week's bill. And then I made the 2 changes of the word cooperation to collaboration. Yeah. So other than that, it's the same exact amendment from last week that I handed out with those 2 minor changes that the agencies asked me for. And DHHS and DOE, I worked with Christine Santiello, I think is her last name, over at DHHS, and I worked with Christine Brennan over in DOE. Both of them have signed off on the bill.
Is anyone from the department here? So Steve saying Chris Santiello and, I'd seen John Williams, but he's not.
Senator Fenton? Not Senator Fenton.
But from DOE, so
Attorney
Santiello is
Fenton.
from HHS.
Yeah.
I got the last name right.
You know, I would just argue we're not in a rush for this bill, and I'd like to get to a unanimous vote on this. I think it's possible, so maybe we just wait off a little bit so we can review it.
You can have it, you want another week to look at it?
Yeah, I think that'd be fair.
What is your stumbling block?
I would just like to review it with some of the advocates. I know Senator Lang said the advocates are on board. I'd just like to review a couple, this amendment as well. I know it's small changes, but the devil's always in the details, and just 1 week would be great.
Are you willing to withdraw your motion?
Sure.
Senator
Thank you,
Lang
Senator.
withdraws his motion and withdraw the motion on both the amendment and on the original bill. And we will do this next Tuesday, okay?
All right, we'll pen it in.
Senate Bill 525.
So Madam Chair, I make a motion to ITL.
We have a second.
I'll second that.
We have an ITL. Moved in the second on 525. Any discussion? Senator Prentice.
So I'm going to oppose the ITL and ask my colleagues to vote it down. And I'm sure this is not a surprise, so that we can, put in a motion of, or I can put in a motion of to pass. I am still lost at why we are not willing to put in, we talked about this last week, why we're not willing to put in any type of, checks and balances on eligibility. If you're on Medicaid, if you're on SNAP, if you're on other programs where they are publicly funded, your eligibility is checked. So we're not doing that. Secondly, and I said this last week, I'm not in favor of just checking eligibility, saying that it's changed, and removing a child from a program. I think we have to, as a policy body, create a transition plan. So I think that this is, I want to put a check and balance in place, and I would actually amend this further to put in that, if we want to refer to it as a soft landing, but I'm not going to support anything that, I'm going to continuously hold my ground on checks and balances and eligibility, that one program with public dollars should not be treated differently than other programs with public dollars. Okay.
So are you willing to put in a transition amendment that you think is a fair one?
Yes, I am, and I would work with the sponsor to make sure that we could agree to do that,
Okay,
which is Senator Alschuler, correct?
yes.
All right. I just
Sounds
think
good.
it's time.
So, Madam Chair, the reason why I'm an ITL on this bill is the dramatic nature of changing a child's education midstream. And what that means, if a child's no longer eligible for a program and we have to rip them out and have to change schools and what that means. To that end, I'm working with Senator Bradley. We passed in this committee a EFA bill on a 3-2 vote about manifest hardship. to that bill, Senator Bradley is going to be adding an accountability component that will create an accountability at the entry level point in elementary school, a transition point at middle school, and then another transition point at high school where eligibility will be checked again. So knowing that that is needed, this bill as it's written is not a good bill. The audit mechanism and the annual requirement is a bad bill when you think about the child and what that means to the child. I get the understanding to the state, but we gotta remember there's a kid on the other end of this funding and what it means to that child. So I think the transition periods are reasonable that Senator Bradley is drafting an amendment for, and I think that that's the proper way to go. This bill is not.
Senator Ward,
Senator Prentice.
thank you very much. I've made it clear time and time again that the best interest in the child, in fact, that's the name of the manifest educational hardship statute, which is a different bill. We've already been down this road, is front and center for me. But we have to start treating programs the same way. And as you just heard, I am willing to work on developing a transitional program. Now, if you and Senator Bradley are working on an amendment that would bring a check to this program for eligibility at certain points in time, before I dismiss this out of hand, I'd want to see that amendment. And because I could get on board with that. I'd like it to be tighter, but I want to see that. So I don't think we should dismiss something out of hand without knowing what else is there, knowing what this other amendment looks like. And I'm pleased to hear that the nature of that amendment is under serious discussion. Thank you.
Senator Lang, when can we expect that amendment?
I'll talk to Senator Bradley today or tomorrow, and I'll find out where it's at over in
Because
finance.
I think that would be important to get that.
Just understand, finance has until April. Grant, is it April? Finance has until April. I'm sorry? Yeah, it was April, right? First, second week in April. So they may or may not move really fast on it. But again, I don't think on this bill, I'm still a no, so.
We have an RTL on this bill, and we have discussed it. And I think we're gonna wait for the amendment before we make a decision on this bill.
I will withdraw my ITL.
Withdraw the second.
Sure.
Okay. So we'll wait for this bill until next week, hopefully next week. 526, that's B 526. Public school facility condition assessment and school building aid grants for temperature control.
Madam Chair, I'm going to move auto pass, and there's an amendment by Senator.
I'll second that.
Let me take a minute to read the amendment.
So Madam Chair, I'm going to move amendment 24-0442S, but I do have a further amendment to the amendment once we pass it.
I'll second.
Senator Lang or to pass on the amendment. But we have to go back to the bill, original bill, 526.
The committee amendment or
What's
Senator
the,
Lang?
I don't have the physical amendment.
Oh.
It's just striking a couple things in the bill. So I'm talking to Peter, we can adopt this and then I can move to strike some languages out of the bill as amended and we can make that the committee amendment.
okay, I'd like to have a motion on 526 on the original bill.
Yeah.
Or to pass up. Okay.
Senator Lang and Senator Prentice, first and
Okay.
second on auto
And
pass.
then we have the amendment. You have Senator Whitley's amendment, and did you say you have an amendment as well?
Well, I'm going to make a verbal committee
Oh, I
amendment
see, okay,
after we pass this because this amendment is the basis for the committee amendment.
okay.
Well, Senator Lang, I was thinking you could just say like, adopt 0442S striking, have that be, adopting.
Let's do it
Okay.
as 2 moves.
Okay, so back
Adopted.
to the amendment of this bill on 442. So I have a motion to pass it,
So moved?
second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, it's open to further amendment. I'd like to offer an amendment. So under Roman numeral 1, I completely agree with the first sentence. I want to strike the entire second sentence. My concern is that we talk about air quality issues in schools, and then we talk about things that are outside of schools, outside the building and everything else. So this whole thing, the policy shall address the methods of minimizing or eliminating emissions from buses, cars, delivery vehicles seems incongruent with the original bill, which talks about just having implementing a policy governing clean air standards. And the second part of the same amendment, but the second request is strike number 2 appropriation. Because all we're asking towns to do is develop a school board policy, we don't need to put $5 million behind it. So that's the amendment, is to strike the last sentence, starting with the policy and ending with environmental services in Roman numeral 1, and then strike the appropriation in number two. That would be my committee amendment.
Senator Ward?
Yes.
So, if I may, so I hear what Senator Lang, I do hear what you're saying, but I'm just wondering if that second sentence, it is things that are outside the school, but like, it's kind of, so the best way to describe this is I was at a meeting over Christmas time in Virginia, and right outside of our conference room where the vent for the air conditioning and the heating was, the lawn crew was there with their gas-powered leaf blowers, and it was coming into the building, and people in my meeting were like, oh my God, I'm really dizzy, you know, what's wrong? And we figured it was the exhaust, you know, from those leaf blowers that was actually coming into the room and making people physically sick. So is this more the second sentence about strategies to like make sure that buses aren't parked anywhere near a vent, or that, you know, that those things are considered, like, you can't have a say an idling or a use outside, directly outside of an area that is taking air into a building, because that and that meeting is not the only, I mean, we've heard about people who suffered, like, you know, I was worried about carbon monoxide poisoning. That's the only other thing. So I'm just thinking that that is the intent of that sentence, that it's outside the building, but it has an impact on inside the building if we're not cautious about where they're actually idling their vehicles.
If I may, Madam Chair. So again, nothing stops the school from adopting those kind of provisions. I just don't think we need it in the law, because this greatly expands the conversation from inside the school to outside the school, regardless, right? Because it has a whole separate provision. It talks about everything, everywhere where cars are, and taking into account the anti-idling and clean air zoning policies and all these. That's a great expansion from just making sure the air inside the school is clean. And if they have a policy where they idle their buses, they're going to address that. But I don't think this means that just because we have a school bus idling 100 yards away from the school should be drafted into this bill. This is talking about the kids in a building and the clean air quality. So I think the first sentence does that very clearly and very cleanly, and that can adopt anything that pollutes the air within the building. They can address. And then the second piece, I think, again, is just talking about having them adopt temperature policies, which I think is reasonable. So I just think it, from my position, it too broadly expands the intent of the bill to include areas that are not inside the school, with no sides on it whatsoever.
Okay, now I have a question for clarification. Where are you making the changes?
So on the amendment, so we now, because this is now the bill, because we've adopted it.
Okay,
And so on the bill, as we've adopted it with the amendment, striking, again, the second sentence that starts with the policy on line 6 and going all the way to the last words on line 9. And then striking all of number
okay, the
2.
deliberative, yeah, okay, so
Which
that's
is an
in the
appropriation.
amendment, okay. Anything else in the amendment you're striking out? Okay,
Oh, yeah, it is here. You're gonna
I did,
strike
I said,
that.
that's number 2, I said striking number 2, not
Yeah.
Roman numeral 2.
All right, so from a status point of view, we've got it, the bill is introduced, there's got a motion, so then we're considering the amendment, and then Senator Lang's amendments to the amendment.
So we already adopted the amendment 5-0,
Okay,
so
and
now that is now the bill. And based on that bill, which is the amendment, I'm striking two other provisions from that, from the what's now the bill.
Is this different?
Yes.
49, so we have another amendment, which is 498.
Wait, I don't have that one. I have 442 is the latest amendment I have.
Yep, I have 442, is what we've been talking about. Senator Ward, is it okay if I just ask Jenny Horgan a question? Is this been shared with everybody?
I have not seen it.
Which one? This one or the one now?
I have O442S, none other.
Can we have a quick recess? Is that possible?
I just want to do a quick side by side, try to figure out what's different about this.
Could we all have a side by side then?
Yeah, just to make copies, quick recess.
The board and the district shall develop the policy shall address the methods of minimizing.
Mr. Hawkins, you may speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I can shed some light on this. You may recall during the hearing, we referenced some typos that were emissions from 442. So I think everybody has 442. And there was a subsequent amendment requested, exact same language through line 15. It changed the typo on line 16, the funding of the funding. And then I believe the correction was to also make that non-lapsing. So, and apparently it was not sent to the committee by OLS or Senator Whitley. But, you know, whether that's material to what you're doing now with your amendments, I'm not sure, but I just wanted to, I thought I could save you some time to clarify that.
Thank
So
you.
Roman numeral 1 has what changes in it?
No, there was no changes. So for the bill, or excuse me, for the amendment 442, the amendment that apparently you did not, that was, have, there is,
It only
we-
makes changes in section 2 of the appropriation.
Correct.
That's the only change. So
Correct.
the fact that we're striking it makes it all irrelevant.
that was my point from, yeah. So it was, and the changes just being the typo correction and that it was, the intent of from Senator Whitley was to make that appropriation a non-lapsing, for the facility assessments.
So they took out the funding because it was mentioned twice.
Okay.
On line 16.
Yeah, I do think so.
Thank you.
So Madam Chair, again, I think that it doesn't have any impact at all, considering the motion on the floor is to strike that appropriations whole section anyway. So we're still working from the same version of the bill if we make that strike.
So I'm not opposed to striking what Senator Lang is referring to, the policy. I think schools are already doing this. But I would be opposed to striking the funding. I think we heard in testimony how hot these schools are getting this year, and there's no plan in place. There's no funding to necessarily help that. So I think keeping the funding in there and setting it to finance, letting them determine.
But I don't think we're changing the funding, that we just took out the funding because it was twice.
Senator Lang, I believe.
No,
was-
it's the.
So I struck,
You want to strike that one too?
yeah, so that's.
Section
so
2,
that-
you want to
that's what I'm
strike
looking
all
to
of,
do right
not Roman numeral 2, but
Strike
number
that
2.
sentence and strike all of number 2. That's the motion I just made. I will say, and I think Grant back there, who's busily reading something on his phone, already informed me that Roman numeral 2 is already current law. We don't need another bill. doesn't need it, doesn't need to be in there. But it's
Any
all,
school district, you're saying that's already law?
that appropriation is already current law.
Well, that's number two.
The
not-
number two, not Roman numeral two. Number two, and you can correct me at,
Hawkins?
So thank you. And for the record, Brian Hawkins, NEA New Hampshire. The comment I was making earlier was so the regular type in Roman 1, beginning on line 5, the school board of each district, that second sentence that you were suggesting to strike, the policy shall address methods of minimizing, that is current law. So that was more of just a, for your information, that part is not a new proposed section in the bill. It's there only because we're adding the bill would add Roman 2 to that section. So
Okay, thank you.
in fact, I'm not even sure why they needed to put that in.
I'm with you now, it's, you hear what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
So again, another point for clarity. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, we're back.
Back to the bill. Madam Chair, we've adopted 442
Yep.
on a 5-0 vote.
Yes.
I'm asking to further amend the bill now as it exists based on 442 to strike that last sentence and to strike the appropriation. It's not needed.
To strike the sentence number 2 in the section 1, in Roman numeral 1.
Roman numeral 1, the
Right,
second
take that out.
sentence.
Yep.
Yep. And then to strike Roman numeral 2, which is the appropriation.
Actually, number 2.
I'm sorry, number 2, which
Number
is the
2,
appropriation.
You said that is already in law.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. We
But the
passed
appro-
the amendment, made some changes. Have a vote, your OTP on the
I
original
think she had a
bill.
question.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
All right. So number 2, not Roman 2, is in law, but is the appropriation. That sum is not, correct?
No, the understanding is that is, if you look at this bill, the things that are in bold are the changes to the law.
I've only got this.
So the things that are in bold, which is Roman numeral 2, and in the
Right.
title, air quality and temperature controls. They added and temperature controls. So again, we don't need the appropriation, it's already in law. I don't want to strike the whole second sentence in Roman numeral 1. So I think that's clear. Said it 3 times.
So is there funding for these assessments and this work that's in law but without an appropriate,
The
is
appropriate,
the 5 million in,
yeah, it's in current law. We don't need it in this bill.
it's in the current law?
Yes.
I-
Actually, do you have your,
I have a
Give me your-
computer.
actually, if you want to give me your education book, I'll look up
Yes,
the
if we have
exact
that.
statute and
I just
validate.
want to be sure because I don't want this is a place where I think the state should help schools and, it will be shifting onto the backs of the locals if we're gonna do this and we're not gonna have an appropriation to do it. So I just want to be clear. I'm sorry about the back and forth.
Attorney Fenton, do you have anything to say on this?
Just hide no. No,
She
no.
says no.
All right, I'm gonna look up 195-15A.
Actually, so I know why they added the first section in. They added it in because they added in order to break up the law to have a Roman numeral 2, you have to have a Roman numeral 1. That's why we have both Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2 listed, even though Roman numeral 1 is already the law. Give me 1 second.
We're set on Roman numeral 1, but I think the funding, I believe the funding is not available for this. That's why we're adding it.
The funding's in a different section, hold on.
Number 2. You have the number 2, Roman numeral 2.
198-15A.
Grant, you know where that funding, you said it was, I'm trying to find it, but I don't see it.
The finance probably, I'll find it real quick.
approach with trepidation, young man. Yes.
The hat trick for. I think I see. So for section 2, the appropriation, I think the confusion that's created by this is that they did not put this in bold.
Yeah, that can be-
And I'm not. Because it's just a new. I'm not sure why they did it that way. I guess so.
All right. So either way, Madam Chair, again, school boards regularly develop policies. They've already developed Roman numeral 1 because it's already law, right? So that policy already exists. It's the 248 already says what's in number 1. Number 2, which is the ad. I don't think we need to make an appropriation of $5 million for the school boards to set policies that when it's too hot, the kids will they'll either shut down the school or close the school. Again, it's an assessment policy, and it's in addition to Roman numeral 1, which is already in law. And so again, I don't think a $5 million ad to the school boards to be able to say, hey, look, we're going to close our schools after it reaches, what's the number in here? Over 88 degrees or below 60 degrees in the schools. Do you need a $5 million appropriation to establish that policy? I don't see as needing $5 million, having served on the school board. I don't see what you would even spend that money on, other than we've outlined what the policy is. They just need to adopt it.
Grant for school community. So this adds,
May I?
Bill,
I'll defer to you, Madam Chair, if you'd like me. I think while the two are in the same bill, I think Senator Lang, to Senator Lang's point, the facilities assessments is something that the department, I know, has wanted to be able to have for schools since Representative Ladd and others, we testified during the hearing on this bill, as a component to how to prioritize building aid. The problem is that there hasn't been the funding for that. I know there was an attempt to achieve that funding because the facility assessments are for not just temperature and not just air quality, but for all sorts of aspects of building safety. They were not able to acquire the funding, is my understanding from, I believe they applied for a federal grant. Originally, the intent for the facilities assessment a couple of years ago was that it would come from the Public School Infrastructure Fund. But subsequent to the legislature adopting that, there was sadly a school shooting. And understandably, the Public School Infrastructure Committee, along with, I think, some money from the federal government, said we're going to prioritize this money for school security type improvements. And so the funding was never really realized to help school districts with these facility assessments that could really highlight the need for building aid, or if they're making the case to their local voters, we need to do this because we've done a facility assessment and, here's a major problem with the building. And so I hope that helps clarify. So the two aren't directly connected. I think that's fair. I think the facility assessments are sort of all encompassing in that, we have it. This is something that is important for school districts to be able to do. So they have a handle on what is it really are the issues that need to be prioritized for their
but I
building.
believe we have a separate bill dealing with facility assessment.
I would say
Well,
that,
I'll leave that to.
the money is a finance issue. We're voting on the policy of it. And so we can send this to finance and have them figure out the money.
Whether the 5 million should be or not.
Exactly. I don't think that's our prerogative. I think, we can get a 5-0, vote on this, put it on consent, and let finance deal with the money.
So the problem is it's not going to go to finance. There's no FN at the end of this bill. We are the last committee to see this bill.
But wouldn't it go if there is a,
Mr. Bossy.
Grant Bossy, New Hampshire Senate. Finance does not take all FN bills. It takes some bills that do not have FNs. If you add an appropriation, I am relatively sure the chairman of finance will recommend taking it to finance. However, put the money in it and let finance decide whether to spend the money. Spending money is a policy question too. That is also if you decide that this is or is not a good use of tax dollars, that is certainly within your purview to decide as well, one way or another.
So, Madam Chair, the only thing I'd say is I want this policy to pass about the temperature. That's the key component of this entire bill is fixing the temperature issues and not the funding of, and my concern is even in this section, if you read the $5 million couldn't do what Brian was speaking about because it says it must specifically deal with only section 1, which is the air quality. So you couldn't do in scoping a giant safety, everything, because specifically in the appropriation they're asking for, it only can deal with air quality. So you can do a facility assessment as long as it's relative to only to air quality. And in theory, this has already been law for a while, section 1, and the schools should have already done this. And so I'm not sure what we're appropriating money for, and I would rather it not go to finance and end up with an ITL. And so by striking the appropriation, we get the temperature controls in that we're asking for and to develop policies around temperature controls. And I could easily see it being a 5-0 here and going to the floor and being on consent and passing with no problem. We put the appropriation in, we risk losing all of it. And I'd rather not do that.
Senator Prentice.
So I think that, thank you, Senator Ward. So we're here because regardless of the fact that, well, no, considering the fact that this is in law, we now have been hearing from our schools, not just now, but for the last couple of years, that it is too hot in the classroom for more than just, it used to be like in June when you're getting ready to get out of school, you had a couple of days where you're like, it's not like that anymore. Okay, so the rise in temperature has dictated that children in schools and their teachers and all the staff there are overcome. And we're trying to mitigate that by putting a policy in place to say, this is where it's gonna, this is what it's gonna be. So we know that it's a drive in the temperature that is bringing us to this. We could pass this without the appropriation and put it on consent and see it go through. We could pass it with the appropriation and send it to finance. And even if finance strikes it, it still comes back to the full Senate where we could then say, okay, you have struck that, but we're going to take with either a floor amendment or overturn. We probably bring a floor amendment in and just put the policy piece back in place. I'd send it to finance and let them decide. I'm kind of like this back and forth. We know there's a problem. We've heard that there's the possibility that it's going to cost some money to manage this situation. I don't see what the harm is in sending it to fiscal. If I'm outvoted, I'm outvoted, but there's a number of bites in the apple along the way that we can take to make sure, whether it has an appropriation or not, that this gets past the finish line. That's what I have to say. I barely had any coffee because they didn't put enough cream in it and it tastes terrible. All right, that's it.
Madam Chair, there's a motion on the floor currently to amend the bill as written by 442 to strike that last sentence and to strike section 2. And it's been moved and seconded.
We have done, that's the amendment, there's now the whole bill, so let's go back to the, I thought we passed.
Well,
the
we
amendment.
voted 5-0. We voted to pass the 442
The
amendment.
original amendment.
Yeah, and now we're on my amendment to that bill as amended, which is to strike those two
So
things.
the bill as amended by the committee,
the original 442,
as amended.
And then.
yes. And now Lang has a committee amendment.
So the committee amendment by Senator Lang is strikes sentence 2 in Roman numeral 1, leave Roman numeral 2 in strike second session of Roman numeral 2.
No, strike, section 2, the appropriation.
Right. I need a motion for that.
We already moved and seconded that.
We have seconded your
Carrie's-
amendment.
I
Okay,
made
okay.
it, Carrie seconded.
All those in favor of those changes?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
So that's 3-2. Okay. Now we go back to the underlying bill, 526. 526 with the amendment. Gonna be, the what? Yeah, oh, to pass with amendment. No, no, yes, yes.
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 Yeah.
Are you gonna pass it with the
Yes.
amendment? Okay. So, I think we're done with this one.
Madam Chair, I move consent on,
Second.
Who wants to take it out? Senator Lang wants to take it out. Okay,
and do we have a 501 consent?
yep.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. Took a little while.
Move to leave executive session.
Second.
All those in favor of getting out of the executive session?
Aye.
Aye. Executive session is done. Thank you very much.
Peter, you all set? Do you need anything from me? Thank you, Ruth.
Going home this snowstorm.